The screen door slammed against the cedar frame with such force that the antler wind chimes rang out in protest. Margaret Thompson stood in the doorway of my grandfather's cabin. Her perfectly manicured finger jabbed at the air like she was conducting a symphony of fury. Her voice hit a pitch that could crack crystal as she ranted about unauthorized firewood stacking patterns and illegal porch furniture arrangements. The veins in her neck pulsed as she gripped her clipboard like a weapon of mass citation. Then she saw him. Deputy Sheriff Ethan Caldwell emerged from behind the stone fireplace, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, his tan uniform crisp despite the morning humidity. He adjusted his wide-brimmed hat with deliberate slowness, a movement that made time itself hold its breath. Margaret's mouth froze mid-shriek. The color drained from her face faster than water through a cracked dam. Ethan took a measured step forward, his boots echoing hollowly on the wooden floor. He spoke in a voice smooth as aged whiskey but sharp enough to slice steel. "Margaret, you just committed criminal trespass on a law enforcement officer's property without a warrant, without permission, and apparently without the good sense God gave a carrot." She stumbled backward, tripping over her own designer sandals, leaving one wedged between the door and frame as she bolted down the gravel path. The roar of her retreating Mercedes echoed for a full minute after she vanished around the bend. "My name is Nathan Brooks, and I'm a 38-year-old forestry consultant who inherited more than just property when my grandfather passed. I got his hand-built cabin on Elm Ridge Road in the Birchwood Falls subdivision, complete with its 1950s charm and, apparently, a bullseye painted on its rustic exterior for every HOA busybody within a 5-mile radius. The cabin sat on 2 acres of pine-covered paradise, a throwback to when this area was just wilderness and wildlife. Grandpa built it with his own hands, each log carefully chosen and placed. The screened porch wrapped around 3 sides, perfect for morning coffee and evening whiskey. I'd moved in 6 months ago, trading my downtown apartment for this slice of heaven, not realizing I'd also inherited a one-woman war against anything that didn't fit Margaret Thompson's vision of suburban perfection. Margaret ruled the Birchwood Falls HOA with an iron fist draped in a pastel cardigan. At 53, she'd turned petty tyranny into an art form. Her husband owned several car dealerships, giving her endless time and his money to fuel her crusades against mismatched mailboxes and unapproved garden gnomes. She drove a white Mercedes SUV, always parked diagonally across 2 spaces at HOA meetings because rules didn't apply to royalty. My first violation notice arrived 1 week after I moved in. The offense: existing while owning a cabin that predated the HOA by 30 years. The specific complaint cited non-conforming exterior wood stain. The cabin's natural cedar had weathered to a beautiful silver gray that apparently violated subsection 12.3 of the architectural guidelines. Then came a citation for excessive pine needle accumulation, followed by a formal warning about my flagstone pathway being 2 inches wider than regulation. Each notice arrived via certified mail because Margaret believed in documentation the way some people believe in air. The antler wind chimes were strike 3. Grandpa had made them from a 12-point buck he'd taken in 1987. They hung from the porch beam, creating a gentle melody when the mountain breeze passed through. Margaret declared them a noise violation and a breach of the Decorative Standards Clause. She actually used the phrase auditory assault in her written complaint. Things escalated when I installed a porch swing made from reclaimed barn wood. It hung from chains that squeaked just enough to feel like home. Margaret appeared at my door within hours, clipboard in hand, her face twisted into an expression that could sour milk. With a voice dripping with artificial sweetness, she informed me that unauthorized seating installations required board approval and a $150 processing fee. I smiled and offered her lemonade. She responded by photographing my porch from 17 angles while muttering about property value degradation. That night, I found a printed copy of the HOA bylaws rubber-banded to my mailbox, highlighted aggressively throughout. The campaign intensified. Anonymous complaints flooded the HOA suggestion box about my wood smoke, my gravel driveway, and the fact that I owned a pickup truck instead of a luxury sedan. Someone reported my bird feeders as unauthorized wildlife attractants. That someone was Margaret, who signed her anonymous complaints with her initials in purple ink. Ethan Caldwell entered the picture 3 weeks ago. We'd served together in the National Guard, and when his apartment lease ended, I offered him the spare room while he looked for a new place. Margaret somehow interpreted a sheriff's deputy moving in as an escalation of my rebellion against her authority. She started leaving voicemails at 2 a.m. about the dangers of firearms in a family neighborhood, conveniently ignoring that half the subdivision hunted deer every fall. The morning of the incident started like any other. Ethan had left for an early shifter, so Margaret thought, when she saw his cruiser pull away at 5:30. What she didn't see was him returning through the back trail an hour later after handling a minor fender bender nearby. I was out back splitting wood for the winter when I heard the front door crash open. Margaret's voice echoed through the cabin as she narrated her own trespassing like a deranged documentary. She shouted about building code violations and threatened to have the entire structure condemned, even citing citizens' inspection rights, which I'm fairly certain she made up on the spot. The sound of drawers opening and cameras clicking mixed with her ongoing tirade about illegal renovations and non-permitted improvements. I set down my axe and started toward the house, but Ethan's appearance had already shifted the dynamic. Through the window, I watched Margaret transform from crusading warrior to cornered rabbit. Ethan stood perfectly still, letting the weight of his presence and badge do the talking. When he reached for his radio, Margaret let out a sound between a squeak and a whimper. After her dramatic exit, leaving her designer's sandal as evidence, Ethan and I sat on the condemned porch swing, sharing a pot of coffee and laughing about the morning's chaos. He'd already called it in to dispatch, more for documentation than any real intent to press charges. But Margaret didn't know that. Within an hour, the HOA board president, Thomas Reynolds, called to apologize profusely. Within 2 hours, an emergency board meeting was convened. By sunset, Margaret Thompson faced a vote of no confidence and a formal censure for conduct unbecoming an HOA officer. The meeting took place in the community center, a building that always smelled of coffee and disappointment. I attended out of curiosity, sitting in the back row while Margaret stood at the podium, trying to justify breaking and entering as proactive community management. She'd even made a PowerPoint titled, "When Initiative Meets Necessity," complete with stock photos of concerned citizens and pie charts projecting property values. Thomas Reynolds, a retired judge who'd clearly had enough, dismantled her arguments with surgical precision, citing actual law, not the imaginary statutes Margaret had been inventing for years. The vote was unanimous, save for Margaret's own defiant hand raised in her favor. But the HOA censure was just the start. Ethan's official report brought in the district attorney's office, and Margaret faced actual criminal trespassing charges. Her lawyer, presumably paid with her husband's car money, negotiated it down to a misdemeanor with community service, but the damage was done. The real blow came from an unexpected source. Margaret's husband, Richard, who'd been bankrolling her HOA crusades for years, finally reached his limit. Apparently, getting arrested for harassing neighbors was bad for the car business. Who knew? Thompson Motors, where the owner's wife is a convicted criminal, wasn't a winning slogan. Richard implemented a financial restructuring of their household, which meant Margaret lost access to the unlimited legal fund she'd used to threaten residents with lawsuits. She also lost her Mercedes, downgraded to a sensible Honda she drove like it was a personal affront. Word spread fast in Birchwood Falls. Margaret's mugshot somehow appeared on the community Facebook page, posted by an anonymous account called Justice Wind Chimes. The local newspaper ran a story titled, "HOA President Learns Hard Lesson About Property Rights," featuring a photo of my cabin and its offensive antler wind chimes. Margaret's community service assignment was poetic justice. Judge Reynolds, Thomas's cousin, sentenced her to 200 hours with Habitat for Humanity, helping build homes that would never meet her former HOA standards. She spent weekends hauling lumber and installing windows in houses with vinyl siding and chain-link fences. Her professional humiliation was complete when the real estate board revoked her license to sell homes in the county. Apparently, criminal trespassing convictions don't inspire buyer confidence. Her side business of staging homes collapsed faster than her reputation. At the next HOA meeting, Margaret sat in the audience, no longer allowed at the board table. The new president, Emmeline Gwynn, immediately abolished half of Margaret's absurd rules and instituted a grandfather clause protecting pre-HOA structures like my cabin. The vote was unanimous. Margaret tried to speak during the public comment period, clutching notes in trembling hands. She managed 3 words before breaking down. The woman who'd terrorized the neighborhood for 5 years was reduced to tears by her own arrogance. She fled the meeting, leaving her notes behind, which someone later posted online. They were mostly complaints about other people's lawns. The final sting came when the judge ordered Margaret to pay my legal fees, even though I hadn't sued her. Ethan had recommended a lawyer friend who filed a countersuit for harassment, and Margaret's actions made it a slam-dunk case. The $50,000 settlement went to the local animal shelter in Margaret's name, ensuring she'd get their fundraising calls forever. Richard filed for divorce 2 months later, citing irreconcilable differences and criminal behavior. The car dealership empire she'd helped build with her staging expertise was divided without her input. She moved to a small apartment complex across town, the kind with no HOA and vinyl siding that would have horrified her former self. I still see Margaret occasionally at the grocery store, pushing a cart like an ordinary person instead of terrorizing produce managers about organic vegetable displays. She avoids eye contact and often abandons her cart if we're in the same aisle. The woman who once measured grass height with a ruler now lives where dandelions grow wild. The cabin stands unchanged, its weathered cedar walls a testament to common sense triumphing over petty tyranny. The antler wind chimes still sing in the breeze, now protected by an official HOA exemption. Ethan moved out after finding his own place, but still stops by for coffee on the illegal porch swing. Last week, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words written in purple ink: "I'm sorry." I hung it on the refrigerator with a bear-shaped magnet, right next to Grandpa's photo. The new HOA board sent a formal apology and a lifetime exemption from all architectural requirements. They also named the walking trail behind my property Brooks Path, honoring my grandfather's conservation efforts. Margaret would have despised the non-conforming wooden sign they installed. At the annual Birchwood Falls Community Picnic, Emmeline Gwynn presented me with a custom wind chime made from Margaret's abandoned HOA citations, laminated and strung together. It hangs next to Grandpa's antler chimes, creating a unique melody when the wind blows just right. Margaret Thompson now faces 5 years of probation, $50,000 in legal settlements, and a lifetime ban from serving on any homeowner association board in the state. Her expression when the judge read that last part was a mix of disbelief and devastation, as if he'd sentenced her to stop breathing.